How are you?
You know, there are some days that you wake up in this job and you feel like you're totally vindicated for everything that you said, and the Dallas Mavericks get rid of the slug that is Luka Doncic.
Oh, did they fire him?
They traded him. They traded him for a 5 warm Bud Lights. And I think they actually
not even cold.
Well, no, and I think they actually got decent value for him. That's how little I think of Doncic. Look, we've been way ahead of the curve on this whole deal, and I can't wait to get into this and all the reasons for this. But I have suggested forever that the Mavericks get rid of that slug, and they have. They have. And I don't think there was a big market for him like the rest of the world thinks. I think everybody else saw the same thing when the world sort of had an epiphany last year when Doncic couldn't guard his grandmother against Boston and gave no effort whatsoever. I think the world woke up. You know, Brian Windhorst, who's one of the most respected NBA voices, said that, you know, in realizing, in talking about what the Mavs had done here, that they know Doncic better than anybody, and you might want to keep that in mind. Yes, you might want to keep that in mind, because they know what a slug he is. This isn't new. Okay? This is a fat, out-of-condition slob who is the most selfish player I've ever seen and the worst NBA defensive player I have ever seen. And I've said this repeatedly. You're not winning anything with him. It's not happening. It's not happening. It was not going to happen. And the part that people are missing somehow, you know, they're talking about, well, his age, he's on the downhill. Are you not watching? He doesn't even play anymore. He's always hurt. So if he's always hurt at 25, what's he going to be at 32? You know, people are talking about, well, you know, they would have this franchise player for the next 10, 15 years. They don't have him now. He's a fat cow. He's one of the most lazy, shiftless players I have ever seen. I have never seen any NBA player give less effort defensively than this clown. And yet he wants a max contract. And offensively, he's the Antichrist to everything that basketball is supposed to be. He walks the ball up the court. He bounces it into submission. His own head coach, Jason Kidd, in the playoffs last year said, look, we just can't keep playing the way Luka wants us to play. Luka wants us to walk the ball up the court. We just can't keep playing that way. Ding, ding, ding. His own head coach. You think the ownership of that franchise is just going to get rid of him if they, you know, all I hear about is, well, the economic benefit to Luka Doncic. Who cares? You think did the franchise show like they cared? No. They're not paying that slug a max contract. Are you kidding me? We're going to pay him a max contract, and the guy is never in shape, never in condition. You know what? Anthony Davis may be 30, but at least he's in basketball shape. At least he can run up and down. At least he'll try defensively. We have told you this all along. This is the most overrated player of my entire lifetime. He is a fat, out-of-condition slob who does nothing to get in condition. And because of it, he's always hurt. He doesn't even play. He's 25 and he doesn't play. You got idiots talking about, well, you know, they would have a franchise player the next 10 years. They don't have one now. What on earth are you talking about? They don't have a franchise player now. When's the last time this dude even played? Christmas? He was gimping around in last year's NBA final. He's always gimping around. Why? Because he's fat and out of shape. He's a fat slob. But we're going to pay him a max contract and plan on building our franchise around him for the next 10 years. How are you going to build around a guy for the next 10 years who doesn't play now? when he's 25. Wakey. You know, Ramona, you want to know what this guy is? And not only that, he's a world-class a-hole, and everybody knows it. Everybody in that organization knows it. Everybody. He is hated by everybody. The officials hate him. He's a juvenile fat brat, and everybody hates him. That's what they are. This guy built a franchise around him. You know, the next 10 years. Again, give me the next 10 games. Forget the next 10 years. Let's see if somebody can get Lardo on the court for 10 games. Ramona, let me hear what Brian Windhorst had to say last year. This is last year during the NBA Finals.
Yeah, I thought it was perfect that Luka fell onto the ground there in an unacceptable position to put himself in with 4 minutes left with 5 fouls, and then immediately looks at the bench and says, "You better bleeping challenge it," as if it's the bench's fault that he just made a terrible play. I'm standing here in the Mavericks tunnel. Over there is the Celtics tunnel. That's where the winners are. If Luka's ever going to be a winner coming out of this tunnel here, he is going to have to use what's happened in this finals as a learning experience. His defensive performance is unacceptable. He is a hole on the court. The Celtics are attacking him. They are ahead in this series because they have attacked him defensively. And you've got a situation here where Luka is complaining about the officiating. They have begged him. They have talked with him. They have pleaded with him. He is costing his team because of how he treats the officials. He's a brilliant player. He does so many things well. They are here because of how he did. His performance in this game is unacceptable and the reason why the Mavericks are not going to win. He's got to get over this. And the fact that he came out after the game and blamed the officials showed me he's nowhere close yet. So maybe over the summer, somebody will get to him because nobody with the Mavericks or anybody else in his life has. And that's where the Mavericks are at this point. They're never going to get to this tunnel with the trophy if he doesn't improve those aspects of his game.
Nobody else has been able to get to him. Not his family, not the Mavericks. Nobody else has been able to get to him. That tells you all you need to know. He's a bad guy. He is a bad guy. Nobody can get to him. He's an absolute basketball monster, is what he is. And I mean that in the worst possible way. He is the antithesis to everything the game of basketball is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be a running game where the ball moves. The beautiful game. The Spurs, the Warriors, they played the beautiful game. The ball moves. You don't sit there and have one guy just bounce the basketball to death. But that's all this guy does. Again, his own coach in the NBA Finals last year said, we can't keep playing the way Luka wants us to play. We can't just walk the ball up the court. That's what Doncic wants to do. He wants to walk the ball up the court, play point, bounce the ball for the entire shot clock, and then make some move for himself first. And if everything else breaks down, then he distributes the ball. And he shocks people because he finally passes it. That's the reality of Doncic. Meanwhile, he's the worst defensive player I have ever seen in all the years I have followed the NBA. The only guy I can even think of that was remotely close was a guy named Ernie DiGregorio, who was a star at Providence College. When he got to the NBA, they nicknamed him Ernie No D because he couldn't guard anybody. But at least he tried. This guy doesn't even try. But then we're talking about how we're going to build a franchise around him. Again, last 2 years, he basically doesn't play. But again, the notion that, well, at 25, we'll have him for another decade or more. Really? You don't have him now. He doesn't play now. He doesn't play at 25. So what's his Larde going to look like at 35? Are you kidding me? The Mavericks did exactly what they needed to do. And oh, by the way, this whole thing about suitors, trust me, this market isn't what anybody seems to think it is. There were not teams lining up for this dude. Trust me. Everyone knows what a jerk he is. Everyone can see. They're not blind. They can see he's a fat guy who doesn't play defense. And he's one of the most selfish players I've ever seen. Everybody else can see that. You know, I heard somebody say, well, you know, they should have at least called OKC and seen about Gilgeous-Alexander. Yeah, okay. So, in other words, you think that OKC is going to give up Gilgeous-Alexander for that fat guy who never plays? At 25? Are you crazy? That's not happening. There's no other team in the NBA who's trading their young star for your alleged young star. Not happening. Nobody. Nobody in their right mind would give up their young star. Their young stars who play both ends of the court. They're going to give up one of those. Oh, by the way, and who actually play, who aren't always gimping and limping. Every time you've seen Doncic for as long as you can remember, he's been gimping around the court. When's the last time you saw him that he wasn't gimping around the court? What year was it? This is the most utterly laughable thing I've ever seen. Yeah, I don't care what you got for him. They wanted to get rid of him. Do you not get it? They wanted to get rid of him. That's the motivation behind this. They've had enough of him. They've had enough of him and his whining and his crying and his selfish play and his walking up the court and his guarding nobody. I mean, Kwok had a stat, I don't even know where it came from, but that said he ran hard only 2.8% of the time. Ran hard 2.8% of the time. First of all, I would say that's an overestimate. I'd say it's more like, 0.8. But because he basically never runs hard. And that's the guy you're worried about keeping. That guy. The guy who hasn't played a game since Christmas. Oh, he's 25, but the next 10 years are going to be grand. They're going to be absolutely spectacular. Yeah, except he doesn't play now. Except he doesn't play now. And again, tell me. By all means, tell me. Tell me when the last time you saw this guy play that he wasn't gimping around the court. Tell me. Go ahead. Was it last year in the playoffs? No, he was gimping through the whole thing. This year? No, gimping constantly. It was one injury, then it was a different injury. Always injured. Always injured. It's hard to understand, right? He's fat. He's way overweight. He doesn't look like he's ever lifted a weight in his life. And oh yeah, the NBA is actually a rigorous game, even if you don't move on defense. Even if you don't move. And yet, there are people worried about the Mavs franchise losing that guy. Trust me, the Mavs knew exactly what they were doing. They had one desire, not to give this guy a max contract and to get rid of him. That's their desire. And I told you this. I've told you this for the last year, more, that they needed to get rid of Doncic at all costs. Get rid of him. He's a human cancer. I hate to use that term. I take that back. I don't like using that term. Cancer is a real thing that real people face. He's a poison pill to the entire system. Let's put it that way. Because that's what he is. That's what he is. And yet people are talking about how, well, why would the Mavs give this up for a 30-year-old who's hurt? Well, the 30-year-old plays a lot more than this guy does. And again, you're missing the point entirely if that's what you believe. Because if I got a guy who's 25, who is fat and out of condition constantly, there's so much so the team has to beg. I mean, at the end of last year, everybody agreed, right, that Doncic was fat and out of shape and needed to get in condition. Did he do that? No. He's fatter and less conditioned than ever. And because of it, he doesn't even play at all. So let's extrapolate the 25-year-old who hasn't played meaningful basketball since when? I don't even know. And hasn't been seen doing anything but gimping around a court in how many years? 4? But we're going to extrapolate that guy out for a decade and think that he's somehow going to be the cornerstone of our franchise for the next decade when he can't play today? And he hasn't played since Christmas? The lunatic fringe is out on this one. You know what it is? It's all the people who believed in this phony version of Luka Doncic as the next great white hope, the next Larry Bird. There are people saying he's better than Bird. Idiots. All the people who bought in to the myth that was Luka Doncic and had it blow up in your face. And now it's blown up in your face again when the franchise who owns him, who as Windhorst says, knows more about him than anybody else on earth, they want to give him away. They don't even want him around. And yet the answer to that is, well, they're wrong. No, they're not wrong. They're the only ones who are right. And if you actually know what you're looking at, and when it comes to basketball, you would know this too. And you is generic across the board. Because we've been telling you this on this show for years regarding this guy. There is nothing new regarding this guy. And no, he's not going to go to La La Land and suddenly become some different person. I don't even know what they're going to do out there with him. I mean, look, the Mavericks knew late last year, they knew they could not just let this guy have the ball and walk it up the court from a basketball standpoint. So they tried to move him off the ball some. Well, he pouts when you do that because he doesn't want to be off the ball. He wants the ball in his hands. Because the only thing he cares about is how many points he scores. And sadly, there were actually basketball people who that was the only thing they saw when they watched him. They didn't get the rest of it because they don't know the game. They don't know the game. Because only somebody who doesn't know the game could make any sort of case for Doncic as a top 5 player. That's utterly laughable. I'll tell you what he is. He's a top 2 Larde with Zion. That's what he is. That's the subset he's in. And we've been discussing the dumping of Luka Doncic, which is exactly what it was. And with really good reason, and a whole franchise agreed on it, a franchise that knows him, as Windhorst correctly said, a franchise that knows him better than anybody else, and they just want to be rid of him. And that tells you all you need to know. Tells you all you need to know, because trust me, the great players, teams do not want to get rid of. The Celtics didn't want to get rid of Bird. The Lakers didn't want to get rid of Magic Johnson. The Bulls didn't want to get rid of Michael Jordan. The great players teams don't want to get rid of. This whole franchise was unified in the sense they wanted to get rid of this plague, which is what he is. An absolute plague. He's a plague to the game of basketball. He's the antichrist to basketball and the way the game is supposed to be played. In every way, shape, or form. Every way, shape, or form. Offense, defense, all of it. The whining, all of it. He's a historic whiner. The only guy who whined in the history of the game as much as this guy was Rick Barry. He's the only other guy who whined as much as this guy. And you heard it from Windhorst last year. You know, they need him to stop because the officials are screwing Dallas over because they've had enough. They've had enough. So you can't even get a fairly officiated game because the biggest whining brat, again, the only thing he needs to whine about is himself. When he looks at his fat face in the mirror. That's the only thing he needs to whine about. Because that's what he is. He's the laziest, most shiftless, selfish player I have ever seen in the entire history of basketball. I've done this a long time. I've never seen anybody like this guy. He's the great white hopeless is what he is. He's not the great white hope. That's what he is. And that's why they got rid of him. And that's exactly what they should have done. They should have gotten rid of him for anything they could get. And again, all these people who think, well, you know, you could have had anybody you want. No one's giving you crap for that guy. The people around the NBA are not dumb. They're not giving you...
Yeah, but they traded him.
Yeah, for, you know, a 6-pack of Bud Light.
I know, but the other team
look,
has
30-year-old
him now.
Anthony Davis, at least with Anthony Davis, they've got a guy who's going to play more than Doncic. At 30, he's playing more than Doncic. And he is good on both ends of the court. And he plays most of the time now.
They'll get a few years out of him.
That's right. They will. A few quality years, which is more than you're ever going to get out of Doncic. If the Lakers think for 1 second that they have found the answer, the post LeBron James answer to what ails them, oh, did they have a rude awakening coming their way? Because first of all, again, this dude doesn't play. Okay? He's always hurt. He's always fat. And when you're always fat, you're always hurt. It's funny how that works when you have to play in the NBA and run up and down the court, at least in theory. Or in Doncic's case, walk up and down the court. This is the reality of what this guy is. And Dallas just couldn't wait to be rid of this plague. And with good reason. And it was a uniform decision. Right across ownership, GM, coach, they all agreed. It was obvious. It was obvious a year ago that Jason Kidd had seen enough and heard enough of Luka Doncic. Obvious what he said in the playoffs. We just can't play anymore the way Luka wants us to play. Luka wants us to walk the ball up and down the court. We just can't do that. Jason Kidd said that. Not Brian Windhorst. Jason Kidd. That's the reality of it. That's the reality of this situation. And the Mavericks are going to be better for it. The Mavericks have Kyrie Irving and Klay Thompson now to play off Anthony Davis. And Davis doesn't just affect the defensive end, which he will, but he'll affect the offensive end. The Mavs have some post size and some guys who can guard and defend. PJ gives them a little bit of offense, but they don't have a low block or a face-up offensive weapon like Anthony Davis. And so they're going to be better for it immediately. They'll be better for it. And again, with Kyrie and Klay Thompson to live off Anthony Davis, I think you have something there. And the other part of it is, look, I don't care what their age is. Anthony Davis's basketball life expectancy is every bit as long as Luka Doncic's is. That's obvious. If your eyes are wide open and you're actually watching what's going on, again, you have a 25-year-old who doesn't play. He doesn't play. And when he does play, he gimps around the court. Now, I don't know if that's just an excuse for him not to play defense. That's the part I've never been quite sure of. But he gimps around the court at 25. And yet you people are planning on him being the cornerstone of your franchise for a decade? Really? So you're talking about a 270-pound fat guy who is always hurt and always skipping around the court, but he's going to be the cornerstone of your franchise for the next decade when he can't stay on the court now at 25. Ask yourself whether that makes sense to you and get back to me. So I think the Mavs benefit and the Lakers don't. That's the bottom line. And if this is the replacement for LeBron James, that's utterly laughable. Because you know what? Look, LeBron's the guy who needs the basketball as well. You've got two primary ball handlers really for LA right now, and LeBron is one of them. But at least throughout his career, LeBron wants to push the ball up the court. All right? That's the distinction. Throughout his career, LeBron has wanted to push the ball up the court. He has not wanted to just walk it up the court every time like Doncic does. That's not going to be a replacement for Doncic or for LeBron James. LeBron James, whether you like him, dislike him, whether you like elements of him, dislike elements of him, regardless, he's one of the greatest players of all time. And he's at the end of his career. But you know what? At 40, he'll play more defense than Doncic will. And that's a dilemma. And
is he 40 already?
Yeah, and at that age, he's more healthy than Doncic is too. He'll take some days off, but Doncic basically takes them all off. And yet somehow that's going to be the future of the franchise in LA. Okay. Didn't Dallas just try that? And did Dallas just say, no mas, we don't want to do this anymore? But somehow it's going to be different in LA, right? It's going to be different because what? Because it's LA? No, it's not going to be different at all. Same problems, except they're going to get worse. They're only going to get worse because every year this guy gets older. I mean, the part that people are missing here, Ramona, is like, this guy is aging like in dog years, all right? I mean, this guy's not 25. he's more like 35 right now. If you talk like chronological age, you know, you talk the health chronological age. How old is Doncic really? How old does he look to you? Just out of curiosity, how old does he look? 25 to you? Does any part of him look 25, or does he look like 35? Because the reality is he looks like 35, fat 35. I think if the notion is that this guy is going to fill the shoes of LeBron James when he leaves, I think they're going to be sadly disappointed, because the only shoes he's going to fill are guys who sit on the bench, because that's primarily what he does. I think this is going to be the Lakers' albatross for the next 10 years. I think it's going to be basically the end of that franchise for a foreseeable future. I think that's what's headed the Lakers' way. I think that it's over. And they've got some other talented young players on that team. But I just think that and clearly they will have to try and add some other pieces. But again, I think if you look at the guy who has been the past and remains the present in LeBron James, and you think about well-conditioned athletes. I mean, you say whatever you want about that dude, but he has been one of the most well-conditioned athletes of anybody I've ever seen. Meanwhile, the guy who's supposed to be his replacement doesn't play at the age of 25 and is just fat and out of shape and doesn't even try to play defense, and doesn't seem to care about any of it. Thinks he's above it all. Yeah, that sounds like a good way to build your franchise for the next 10 years. This is Walt calling Luka the Antichrist. Is some next level stuff. Well, he said, I waited all day to finally get the right perspective on this. Well, I didn't hear much. All I heard is Kwok and Ben. And Ben was calling him Kevin James. So I would say it's a similar perspective. And Kwok wasn't singing his praises either. Kwok was just trying to be a little more neutral. I don't do neutral here from 3 to 7, so you get it. And look, I've been saying this all along. All right, so I feel very vindicated today in everything that's happened, and the fact that they basically traded this dude for 5 warm Bud Lights, and that still may be too much. Still may be too much. And it's just a blatant reality. I got a guy who's citing his offensive stats, his scoring average. I'm sorry, you got to understand the game, okay? And I can't go back and teach elementary basketball. All right, if you don't understand it, listen to what people were saying last playoffs, who finally came around and finally begin to understand the stuff we've been saying here for years. This isn't hard. Again, teams don't give away actual great players. They give away guys that they don't believe in at all, and they know him better than anybody, as Windhorst said. That's the reality of the whole situation. Tex said, my favorite is the 3-legged pregnant water buffalo comparison. That's right. That's what he is. I'm not even sure that's fair to 3-legged pregnant water buffaloes. Can I have one guy, Jeff on Twitter, who I'm on Twitter, by the way, now. I got in. And said, did you ever watch Shaq? I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. Shaq won multiple NBA titles and was an enormous human being. And was certainly in better shape than Doncic has ever been. And so I'm not really sure what that has to do with anything. Was he a dedicated player? No, not as dedicated as Kobe. But it would just be atrocity to put Doncic's name in any sentence with Shaquille O'Neal.